Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being patient with us. Apologies, we had some technical difficulties, but thank you for sticking around. Hopefully, you got to take a look at wares and see Anthony Sonnenberg's work. Thank you all for coming and joining us for this very special event. I am so pleased and honored to welcome artist Anthony Sonnenberg. Tony is an artist currently living and working in Arkansas, but originally from Texas, where he received his bachelor's in studio arts at UT Austin. He received his MFA from the University of Washington. His work is part of the permanent collection of the Crystal Bridges Museum of Art in Bentonville and the Archie Bray Permanent Collection. He most recently had a solo show at Gablet Gallery in Los Angeles titled Anthony Sonnenberg, Cannons Buried in Flowers. And his work, of course, is featured in the exhibition upstairs. He works in a variety of methods. He practices assemblage, taxidermy, performance, and ceramic arts, also produces jewelry. He often mines from art history, incorporating forms and artistic elements from the periods of Baroque, Rococo, and Romanticism. Encountering his work, I thought of 14th century Italian poet Giovanni Boccaccio. I practiced this and now I'm messing it up, I apologize. Well, he was thinking of artists and writers who were fascinated with ancient or ruins of ancient Rome, and he described them as old walls yet new for modern spirits. And in Tony's work we have old objects, old forms, old themes, yet potentially new for us modern viewers. But like the 14th and 18th century artists fascinated with those ruins, Tony's interest in mining from history is not archaeological, but romantic, employing these forms that are all at once drawn from the real world, but nonetheless have the ability to remove us, the viewers, from the mundane world. Built upon a wealth of layers and ornamentation, his intricately detailed sculptural compositions are sites of pensive rumination on decay. Natural forms such as flowers emerge and disrupt the object's constitution, but also flourish and wither away. A constant state of growth and decay recognizable in the natural world. Surfaces crust, drip, bubble, crack. Solid edifices wither away. His objects present a paradox, functioning as iconographic symbols of the achievements and beauty of historical art movements, but also as an elegant reminder of the destructive power of time. To put it simply, his work is a sublime mixture of grandeur, opulence, and dereliction. And hence, we are so fortunate to not only include his work in the ceramics exhibition upstairs, but also to hear from him in person today. So please join me in welcoming Anthony Sonnenberg.
Hi, everybody. I hope I can get that written down. That was one of the best summations, because there's a lot to get in. And Lauren, you did such a good job. Thank you. Thank you so much, Santa Barbara, for having me. I'm so happy to be here. You have a gorgeous town, city, enclave. As I'm sure you guys know, I went to your courthouse. Is that because the courthouses I've been to in the past didn't look like that? That's maybe one of the prettiest buildings I've been to. Okay, so as Lauren mentioned, there's a lot of facets to the practice. It goes from all over the place, from big to small. And I kind of, over the years, have wanted to kind of give the audience to my talks a bit of a roadmap to maybe help you kind of have some guidance to hold on to as we kind of speed off into like the craziness that is my art. And also I wanted to kind of combine that need or necessity with trying to find a form of an artist statement that wasn't completely written, because I think it's one of the cruelest, weird mix-match that people who are mostly involved in visual things and very good at communicating things visually and maybe not therefore so good written are forced to write artist statements all the time. So I thought I'd take a a tip from Instagram, because the one good thing about social media is I think the birth of memes, because I'm always just kind of astounded at how like there are very complicated, weird gray areas of human experience that will get summed up in a one picture meme so well that I'm just like, wow, I feel seen and it's cathartic. And so I made this. How it works is it's basically a Venn diagram, and as we move into the Venn diagram, things get more specific. So the four kind of circles are like they're really the four core kind of main ingredients of the work that keep coming up and are always there and just are always kind of maybe changing the amount that they're showing up. And so those red words are the four catalysts. We have desire, beauty, death, and time. I've always kind of found that the work can kind of take a lot of different forms and take a lot of different tones. And so the kind of combination of the amounts of the big four things with a certain tone is often kind of a jumping off point of a piece. So things could be romantic or tragic or comedy. I also really love drama. So those kind of show up a lot. And then as we move further in, opulence, myth and memory, still life and its mechanics, still life's always kind of running through, and history. And history can mean a lot of different things. So I'm talking about personal, general, geological, generational, and then when we get into geographical, things can go into hundreds of millions to billions of years. And so I'm very interested in that kind of like range of what history can mean. And then as we get closest to the center of that is my art, we have flowers and found objects. So the work will almost always either have a found object or flowers or both, usually both. And I think the found object kind of brings a lot of the desire and the time in with its history and then the fact that I've chosen to kind of pick it out. While the flowers, I think, really bring in the beauty and the death part, maybe better than anything, because they've been a reference for us basically since we've been making art. And then at the center of that is my art. And so this statement that I came up was kind of coming out of when I was teaching for a brief period, and then I was trying to tell other people how to make artist statements, and they were like, this really sucks. And I was like, yeah, I know. I'm trying to think of another way to do it. Wish me luck. And so then it makes you question, like, well, if I'm trying to tell these people what to do I really know what I'm doing? And what is my art about? Because we're sitting in these critiques all the time, trying to figure out, help these people get directions and all that kind of stuff. And so I kind of realized that I think, like, for me, a lot like the fear of death and the anxiety of that comes up a lot as a queer person and as an overweight person, because I have diabetes, and which is kind of like a inherited disease, and it's just always been there. So every time I have something sweet, in the back of my mind is, oh my God, what is this going to do to my blood sugar? Am I going to kill myself? And then being a queer person, finding that kind of pleasure in the more physical world of like, if I hit up the wrong person, will I get beaten? Will I get AIDS? So I think the other thing that's really kind of important to understand the artist, there's always this kind of constant experience of things, trying to be two things at once, trying to be something and nothing at once. Because I think it kind of mimics this experience of always having pleasure enveloped in mortality and just negotiating that. And I think that's something that I feel very personally, but I think it's just a really kind of basic tenet of what it is to be a human. So for, I don't know, maybe the last 10 years, I've always started my lecture or talks with this image. This is John Lorenzo Bernini's Ecstasy of St. Teresa. This is in Rome. It's one of his kind of picturesque pieces. And why I put it in here is because it's really important to me. It represents to me a very early choice in the path of the work I was going to make. So when I was growing up, I grew up in a really tiny Texas town. There was not an art history class. Their art class was like, oh my God, let's make a paper mache symbol of your favorite sports team. And so I was just getting Jansen's art history and just like kind of devouring it. And then I went to art school and I was around all these people from these giant magnet schools, and they were talking about Boys and Duchamp. And I was like, I don't know, I really like this Baroque stuff. And so it was a really choice of, though, I was like, oh, the cool kids, the kids who seem like know what's going on are liking this other art, but that art doesn't seem to excite me. But I really like this art But if I do this art, like I'm gonna have to fight for it. And so I kind of made the decision. In making that decision, I was trying to think about, well, what am I choosing? And for me, the choice was, when I looked at this image, I was astounded and always reminded that there is nothing too cheap or too easy for Bernini not to use. If he has to get a point across, remember this is made at the time where the Catholic Church was in a very real battle, with the heretics of Protestantism, and they were kind of having to like reconsolidate why people should go with the Catholic Church. And he was a very devout person, so I think for him, this was a really real battle in a way. And so he will bring the most expensive marble. He will bring false light. He will put gold in. He will put sex in. He will put magic in. He will put whatever he needs to put in to get your attention. And I remember early on, I read Dave Hickey, the curator, and he kind of laid out this basic premise that like Renaissance pictures, you came into them. They were, you come to them and then you come in, whereas Baroque paintings came to you. And I think I just always felt that the way the world worked, the art had to come to you, and so that's what I would do. And also, when you're trying to get a complicated message apart, there doesn't have to be shame and putting in that honey to make that medicine go down. And then this is the earliest image I'm going to show. This is one of the very first pieces I made when I went to grad school. And I don't know if I knew it at the time, and maybe I did, and I'm just kind of coming back to remembering it, that this piece was really kind of an homage to that Bernini piece. It's called The Apotheosis, and the apotheosis is the process of when a human being goes to being a god in kind of an official way. So Roman emperors went to being apotheosis. Pharaohs from Egypt go to being apotheosis. The Virgin Mary has an apotheosis moment where she's taken by angels up into heaven. And so again, it was like this really early interest in this, like this moment of being in between, of the angel rising up. And the reason it's a bobcat kind of going in there is because growing up in rural Texas, I saw a lot of taxidermy because there was a lot of hunting going on, but that was not something that went in on my family. My family bonded by gardening. So I knew flowers and I love flowers, and that was what I understood and I was comfortable with, and this weird taxidermy kind of represented this weird form of masculinity that I didn't understand. But then I also thought they were really interesting because I was like, they're these weird dead skins trying to masquerade to being alive, and they were in essence in this weird in-between zone. And so he's kind of on his Mother Mary cloud getting carried up into heaven. But I think this, you can see that opulence starting to go on there, and a lot of early things kind of getting on. So we're gonna talk quickly about still lifes because they're really kind of important to understanding a lot of the work, because it, whatever you would call the mechanics of the still life, how they work, what makes them function has really been adopted by me to kind of be the backbone of all my works. And what I mean by that is if we think about it from the Dutch 17th century golden age of still lifes, they kind of start out as this memento mori idea, be aware, these things, they look great, but they're not gonna last forever, proof and point, this isn't a real thing, it's a painting, ha ha ha, so don't get fooled by these pleasures, Jesus, that whole thing. But then as time goes on, they become more of an advertisement for the wealth of like, I've got dosh, here it is. My parents were really interested in that Jesus thing, us not so much. But so I got really interested in this idea of them starting one thing and seemingly kind of go to the opposite, and for a while doing both. Were they an advertisement or were they a warning? But also the idea of stopping time, trying to control time, using trickery to try to bend the laws of kind of reality and existence, and maybe try to hold on to things that are fleeting, and that this, which to me is kind of tempting on about human beings not being able to understand death, which we'll get into later. So this is kind of a 17th century later still life of a guy named Huysman. And then on the other side, we have a photograph by the high fashion and / art photographer David LaChapelle, who was kind of really influential in the early 90s and 2000s for showing a lot of queer kind of culture coming to the surface. And like he would feature Amanda Lepore, who was this super early trans icon. And I saw these still lifes that he did, and he did a series of them in the early 2000s, and I saw them kind of in 2008, 9, 10. And I was just really astounded at how like Lauren said with my work, but I'm really glad to hear this, how it seemed to reference the still lifes. If you were like saw these together in a museum and you were 50 feet away, like you might think they're kind of serious. And then when you go in here, you see that they're actually really quite different. And I was just so struck at how well he was able to mix live flowers and dead flowers, high culture and low culture. Fake, just this melting pot all on this historical framework. And I was like, ooh, I really like that. I want to try and move forward with that. So I think another thing that has always been in the work, and I think I'm just recently starting to find more words for it, is I think a lot about what's going on in the work is me referring to what I will call punk rock tendencies. I don't know if that's a correct assumption, but of like trying to take things that mainstream culture seems to glide over or say is unimportant, and then to take those things and say, not only are they badass, they are important, and here's why, and here's how you need to see it, and really trying to be this advocate for the underdog as kind of a queer fat person. Like, I guess I just always want to be in that corner. And so I've got these two paintings parallel. The one which is on my left, you may know the artist. His name is Caravaggio. He's kind of famous. And then on the right is the most successful female Golden Age painter, who probably many of you have never heard of, and her name is Rachel Rausch, and she is the best flower painter, in my opinion, that has ever been. And I put these two pictures together because don't they have a similar dramatic flair? Don't they have actually similar composition? Now, but the difference is that Caravaggio was a man, and he was a criminal, and he was a bad person. He has this amazing story, and he was also an electrifying painter. But he died penniless and poor, and from wounds because he got jumped on a ship. There's a whole crazy story. Whereas Rachel Rausch painted these portraits her whole life, raised 10 kids while working, was supporting the family in the 17th century, and she never went out of fashion. She sold these paintings until she died. And they're amazing. And I visit them like they're holy relics. There's one in Kansas City not far from me, and I'm just like, oh my God. Thank God for those early Rust Belt industrialists bringing this work to the center of the country. But Proust and point here is still lives are not important. We all know this if you've taken our history class, or the bottom of the pile. But what if we're thinking about it from the wrong perspective? Maybe flowers are the most important thing in the world if you're a woman in the 17th century trying to make a living off your own talent, and the only thing you can study by law is flower painting, because it wouldn't require you to have to see any male nude bodies. Lord forbid. So again, I think what I'm trying to start getting across here is what is important and what's not important always depends on perspective. So I have for a long time been a big fan of female detectives. Two of my favorite here are Jessica Fletcher, and the other is Miss Marple. I also like Poirot. Because of Amazon Prime and Roku TV and all these things, all these shows are coming up. You can watch them for free now. And so in the last couple of years, I've really been getting into them and like obsessed and always talking to my friends about, oh my God, I've been watching Jessica Fletcher, and she's giving it to those guys. And a friend was like, why are you so obsessed with it? And I was like, and I didn't really have a good answer. And so I really tried to think through it. And what I realized is these are people who are not supposed to be in power by the laws of power dynamics as they are. They're women, and worse than that, they're older women, which a lot of people would describe in society as being near invisible. They're not necessarily wealthy, although later in her years, Jessica has an unknown amount of money because she can sure whip out a check to save somebody. But Miss Marple, never so. But yet in their shows, by the end of the episode, they are the one in charge. They are the one calling the shots, and they are the one who is telling you the murderer. And the reason they are able to do that is because they pay attention to the small things. And they are able to say, she was wearing a night robe when she should have not have been, and she this, and you had a pencil in your pocket 5 minutes ago, and then after the murder you didn't, And because of X, Y, Z, and I put these all together, you're the murderer and you need to go to jail. And so I think that has always really spoken to me as a queer person, because in the queer world we would call that coding. Having to pay attention to the little signs to know if you walk into a place, am I threatened or am I not? Are these allies or are they not? How do I find the allies? How do I protect myself and find myself the same things? These are what animals go through in the animal kingdom all the time. And we do it by paying attention to the small things. And because of that, queer people and people of color, and basically a lot of people who are not, being kind of benefited by the system abroad, become really good at what I'm going to start calling, and what has become the focus of my practice, decoration. Oh, before we get into that, though, I also have to say I really like Antiques Roadshow. I'm obsessed with it. I think I like the British better at the moment. But the British one kind of sucks because they're very like prim, and they're not as like obscene as the Americans, so they don't put the price on the screen, so you really have to pay attention. But I get obsessed with Antiques Roadshow because, again, it's this world of where the wishy-washy romantic meets the cold, hard, realistic world of cash and currency. What is more real than that? And people taking these objects and through the magic kind of mechanics of supply and rarity and desire, things can be worth cold hard cash. It can be worth life-changing amounts of money. And why is that possible? It's because objects, they can be beautiful, they can have craft, and they can communicate across time through that, but also they give us things like proximity to famous people. That's not a science. It's not how do you measure that? And somehow through the stories that we tell and the romance of the objects and the magic of an auction, all these things are proven, and who knows how provable they are. They always like to do a special where they're like, well, we said this thing was going to be worth that, and it sold at auction for twice as much, so that shows you that we're correct, but anyways, who knows about the 95% of the other objects. But again, I think it's just funny because we think of these things as separate and different and not powerful and not important, and then suddenly in certain realms and certain contexts, they're right next to each other, and one is feeding right into the other. Maybe decoration and power are closer connected than we think. So this is also an image that's been in my PowerPoint for a long time, and it's kind of changed its meaning for why it's important to me for a long time. It was one of the first rooms that I saw that I knew was Rococo, and I love the lightness of it, the frivolity of it, the kind of virtuosity of it. I think it's fair to say you couldn't find somebody who could do this today. And if you could find it today, you'd have to sell Texas to afford it or something, I don't know. But it's so light, it's so seemingly frivolous, but these were kings and princes who were spending this money, state money, and what were they spending it for? Well, the simple fact is if you have money to build a house like this, you have money to buy guns, you have money to buy soldiers, you have money to invade countries and do real things. And so suddenly, and maybe you have that money because you colonized an island in the Caribbean and you've exported a bunch of slaves, and now you're making a lot of money off sugar. Sugar doesn't seem important until maybe you're breaking your back by forced labor for it. And so suddenly this thing that is all those things that I fell in love with, it becomes a symbol for so much more, and becomes, again, this idea of thinking about the perspective. These things don't seem connected, but when you start going under the surface, they very much are. And they're very much not frivolous. There you go. So these are kind of examples of Baroque and Rococo porcelain. I think the one in the center definitely is Meissen. I don't think I have Sèvres vase. I think the one on the right is actually, the left is actually English. But these vases, I love them. I love just kind of crazy abstractness of them, and they're covered in flowers. And can you imagine the amount of time to make these flowers? And how is it all worth it? And what made the money work? Because now I'm an artist, like I have to see all those things underneath it. And I think the thing that's important to note about them is just like that Rococo room, they seem light and frivolous and as inconsequential as is something could be. And yet, in real-time money, they would have been worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. They were coming from factories that were state-sponsored, so the king was directly involved with them. So if you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, part of what you're buying is association with the king. But what happens if you have a revolution and you have this vase in your house and the wrong person comes in? Suddenly, this thing that's covered with flowers and white porcelain and is so delicate could potentially get you killed. And so I think the reason why I keep coming back to decoration is because while portraits do a really good job of communicating a lot about identity and social status and those kind of things, what is forming those barriers, what is defining those boundaries is the decoration. And the reason we don't see it more is because we don't notice it when it's doing what we expect it to do. But when it starts doing, when the context changes suddenly and it stops doing those things, or they start doing things that confuse us, they become a big deal. Like, for instance, painting your nails shouldn't be a big deal, especially in 2010. But when Drake did it, because he's a masculine black man and we're not used to seeing that type of person paint their nails, it was a minor hubbub, for a while. And people were, spent their time talking about it because it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. It wasn't making the boundaries that we thought it was supposed to make. And we don't, a lot of times, like that. So these are two of my works. The one on the right, I'm very obsessed with urns because there's such this kind of stalwart thing of decoration. Like once you start kind of looking for them, every kind of neoclassical building has an urn on the corner. This is in the collection of the Crystal Bridges, and then the one on the right is just a very recent commission where it's got a very expensive gold glaze. It could cost about $1,000 to cover this with the gold glaze because it's real gold. And I just really like them, so I put them in the thing. But just to kind of see, start making the connections of where I'm taking that work. And I think what Lauren was saying is really true. I mean, I think what I'm bringing to those work is kind of again, maybe those vases are representations that those flowers are not wilting, they are not rotting, they are in full breath of life. But my flowers, it's not so clear. And are they of an empire of its prime, or are they of an empire that's maybe waning? It's unclear. And what are they for? Are they for flowers, or are they for ashes? I show a lot of ceramics because it makes it kind of a main part of the practice. It's really kind of the financial hub of the practice, but it's really kind of thematically just a smaller point. And here's kind of an image of how they kind of work together and the colors that I'm working towards. Kind of an example of ways that kind of weirdly complicated and things that are hard to put into language can be maybe expressed in decoration. This is a chandelier that was from my show just this couple months ago in LA. And it's a chandelier because what is more about decoration and luxuriance and opulence than a chandelier? I think part of what the work here is also doing is kind of building off the queer legacy of not allowing luxury to only belong to the rich. And that there has been a long legacy of queer people mastering things like taste and style. Again, how do you measure those? I don't know, but they have impacts. People like Oscar Wilde, the club kids of the 90s, drag queens of all ages, beg, borrowing, stealing their way to feel and to look, and if only in their own kind of figurative world, to have that same amount of luxury. And because money just makes it easier, but you can do it if you're smart and you pay attention, like Jessica Fletcher. So this chandelier, the structure of it had already been made, and I was showing it at a gallery, and then the gallery sent it back to me without some major parts. So I had to kind of face to remake it, and so since I had more time to kind of focus on the accoutrement, I thought, ooh, what do I really want to do? Because at first it had just been kind of commentary on luxury and all that kind of stuff. But I've been kind of noticing, full disclosure, TMI, in my private time, I identify as a bottom. And it's just been a part of me. There's never been a question about it. I have a very loving, supportive partner, and we have worked through it to be so that I can say to you today, I'm securely a bottom. Anyways, I've been noticing that I didn't feel like there was that many other people around me who were saying, yeah, I'm a bottom. There's a lot of people saying I'm a verse, which like both, or I'm a top, or whatever. And as a queer person who's smart and paying attention, I've always got to be a little bit on guard for hidden misogyny going on there. And so I thought, oh my God, this idea of being receptive, in my mind, maybe the bottom is the closest parallel to the feminine kind of identity in our community. And I feel like there's not enough around of us here. So I want to make something about bottom pride. And it kind of put forth this really interesting challenge of, what is a symbol for bottom pride? How do you pair that, all of that, into a symbol? So I got down arrows, which is what they use in the apps, and I thought, oh, you know, if you turn a heart upside down, it kind of looks like a butt. So, and I mean, what's more universal and time enduring than a heart? So boom, there we go. And then I also just put hearts and had them kind of going all together. But it was a little bit hard to me to say that thing to you about me being a bottom. but the chandelier also doesn't. And what's interesting about a piece of decoration, it's going to be doing it. It's not sold, but hopefully one day it will be in somebody's house or in a public space. And over time and over years, this little message will seep into the surface. And sometimes that's good, or sometimes it could be bad. One reference I've been kind of bringing up a lot to kind of prove this point of decoration seemingly not to be important until suddenly it is thinking about all the Confederate monuments in the country. And how, for a lot of white people like me, I thought that's just decoration. It's meant to be in that park to give it this old fancy style, and I love that. I love the old plastic glamour of it all. But I wasn't asking questions of who they were or why they were there or any of that kind of stuff. And suddenly, when we had the pandemic and suddenly the shift was allowed to come in, these things were triggered hotspots, because turns out they weren't so innocent. They weren't, you know, just these innocent Beaux Art statues that were beautiful. They were kind of supporting this weird racist ideology from a time period 100 years ago, and were these subtle little kind of spurs for people of color, you know, passing them. And so again, it just goes to show, like, those things went under the radar for 50 years until suddenly the thing changed, and then they were red hot pokers in our eyes, you know. Again, I don't know how this connects to this piece. I think I put this piece in here because, again, I really love it. It's a gold thing, and I think it's also an example of a lot of times what happens in the practice is on a kind of functional side, is that a lot of times I'll fail my way to success. So that first piece and this piece were part of a dual commission. I had sold some works to a collector in Paris, and he liked them so much, he said, I want to buy a couple more. Okay, great. And he said, I want gold. And I said, okay, great. I have this gold glaze that's cheap, and I have the gold glaze that's expensive. And so you'll want the cheap glaze, right? And he said, no, I want the expensive glaze. And I said, okay, it's going to be like $1,000 more for each piece. And he was like, no problem. It has to match the table. So I said, okay. So I made that first vase, and everything, I had to learn how to get a sprayer and airbrush it and all these different things, but it all came together and it worked. I thought, oh my God, it's perfect. It's here, it's real. Now I just had to do the second piece. Ran out of the gold luster. When you're buying gold luster, you have the choice of buying 2 grams for $60 or 100 grams for $1,000. There is no in between. So I was like, oh my God, my career is not that hot that these are easy questions for me. So I ended up buying a cheaper luster. And I thought, they're both gold, they won't have a problem. And I put them on top, and they did this weird thing. And I freaked out. Because I was like, this is not gold, it's not like the other piece. Anyways, we just decided to leave it as it is. We sent the picture to the collector. He was happy with it. And now I think it's like one of the best pieces I've ever made. And I think it's so much more interesting with this weird faded structure. And it feels more Byzantine and old and kind of timeless. And so anyways, I think that's one of the great things about ceramics that I think, one thing kind of often bleeds into another and helps the other. And one of the things that's really helped me as an artist with ceramics is learning to let go of a certain amount of control and to trust the process and to just keep firing it until you just can't go anymore. So one of the things that also has kind of happened that's really changed the trajectory of the work is one of the things when I was teaching, before that, I had been really kind of proud, like, I'm not a potter, I don't need to make functional work. If my thing leaks, it's fine. I'm not that interested in pottery. I don't know that I need to really honor the functional thing. I'll make a reference to it. But then as a teacher, I said, I really want to beef up my ceramics world knowledge. And one of the tidbits that I found out is the wheel was invented 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, but not for transportation first. It was invented, they think, to make pottery. And then they said, oh my God, we could use this wheel to transport this pottery to the market. And that's when they really figured it out. So that things like that make me kind of go, well, functionality is really at the heart of ceramics. And the reason that it's here and it has this huge kind of place in our life, whether we realize it or not, is because it holds water. It is pretty good at handling heat shock, which glass is not, and it's super cheap and common, which metal is not. So it just fills this need of civilization. So it's basically as soon as you have a civilization, they know it's there because the pottery is there. If the pottery is not there, half the time the civilization is lost. So then I thought, well, maybe there is a way to honor functionality, but I just got to change my perspective. So several years ago, I was visiting a friend in New York, and I said, I want to go to one of these Beaux Art cemeteries. I always see images of it. So I went to the Greenwood or Greenbrier, I'm forgetting, in Brooklyn, where we see this video, and I was just struck by the beauty of these tombs. And I thought, oh my God, it's all the things I'm interested in. Historical reference, decorative motifs. There seems to be an endless variety of the way these things are getting put together. They're about death. And most importantly of all, people don't seem to think they're important today. So I said, ooh, the stars aligned. So I said, I think I want to get into making art around death because it happens. And what do you do? Okay, just a really quick break. So this is, if you saw those obelisk forms, I kind of took those forms. That's one of the first things I took into, along with the classic tombstone shape. But these two images are here just to kind of take a brief deviation and talk a little bit about how the ceramics works are made, because it may not be evident. So what they are is basically Frankensteins, is how I would put it. If you look at this image on the right, which is the image before it's fired, so basically what happens is I build a skeleton or an underlying architecture, and that's made out of raw clay. And built into that raw clay framework is found ceramic objects. So you can see this clown figurine at the top here is a found object, and there's some in the corners. And then they get built in there, and they get cemented in with glaze, and then on top of that, I put a skin of silk flowers and fringe and little decorative motifs that all get dipped into slip, which is just another form of clay that's watered down, put on top, and then that gets sprayed several times, and then fired. And then once it's fired, everything that's not ceramic fires out completely in a way that's almost magic. So all these little flowers are technically kind of hollow inside. And then around the figure, if you can kind of see up here, you see the clay is cracking around it. And the reason that is because when the clay is fired, it chemically and physically shrinks. It actually loses an atom or something. There's two sides to ceramics. There's a ooby-wooby artsy side, and there's the hardcore chemistry side. And you can guess which side I'm on. I just learned just enough to teach it from time to time. So when it's going around the figurine, it actually has to shrink, and so it kind of cracks, and it reminds me of those weird gargoyles from Ghostbusters where the person pops out. But I always really loved it because it's like, it reminded me of how like architecture is. You one civilization builds on the other, and it references the one before it to give the one their weight and substance. And through the cracks of that, though, you can see through to the history of, kind of beyond. And so I really love that metaphor. Thinking about time, you'll see a lot of clocks without hands, because to me, I thought that was a really effective metaphor for eternity and what death might be. Like this, you know what time is, but there's no way to measure it because it is so immeasurable. Owls come up a lot. Wisdom flies at night. Here's tombstone. So this tombstone on this side, that side, it's mirrored, so you'll just have to work with me. The more colorful one, I'll say, is just kind of referencing that tombstone and maybe trying to see if like it could be, where could I take it and where could I change the perspective? And then this one was made a couple years later. It was also in the LA show, and I wanted to add something to it. And I thought, one of the things I love about Victorians is they always make things multifunctional. So they're always making jewelry that's like, it's a necklace, but you could turn it into a crown, and you can take off the main pendant, and now it's a brooch. And I don't know, I love it. So I thought, how could these tombstones be more functional? So you can't really see it, but right here, what this is a pipe that goes through the other side. Because I thought, well, what happens in graveyards? I can remember being a kid in rural North Texas and wanting to just get away from my parents and smoke some weed and just relax. And there was nowhere to do it because I was in this tiny town. And I remember like sometimes we would just go to graveyards because people, weren't necessarily just hanging out there. We couldn't really spend a lot of time there because the cops would know or whatever, but ever since then I've kind of had like a soft spot for graveyards. And one time I saw an image of somebody had taken a picnic table and they had drilled from the top and then drilled from the side and made this little tiny kind of like marijuana pipe. And I was like, it's kind of like a brilliant form of like communal architecture. Like, I love it. And so I thought, one of the things that really drove me to tombstones is that they do have a function. Their function is this crazy function, which is to say, hey, I existed. I am proof of existence, which is like a crazy function to have, and yet here it is. And so I thought, well, maybe it could be doing that and be something beautiful and be a place of solace and escape for somebody who's living and be something that's flexible and can kind of work multiple ways. So again, I think this for me would be the comedy side a little bit, but also it's kind of dramatic. This is one of the pieces I'm most proudest of. It took kind of years to get together. It was started in the midst of the pandemic, and it was just finished this last year for the show in LA again. And it is constructed a really different way. So all of these flowers, and there are hundreds and hundreds, possibly thousands, I didn't count, are dipped in the slip and fired, but they're hung on clotheslines, and so I can make them all individually. And then I made a steel frame with the meshwork on top and hand-wired all of these things in with some fabric and other things. And what it's kind of referencing is back in the day when people were dying a lot, you couldn't necessarily dig enough graves, like say for New Orleans or where you can't be in the ground, they'll lay people out and let them rot and then take the bones and put them under. And I don't know why it stuck in my head. I went to a graveyard in New Orleans one time and they said that's how it worked, and so it's kind of already piqued my interest. Game of Thrones was happening during this. They were always burying people on pyres for some reason. And also, I also heard a story about the oldest religion in the world, the Zoroastrian religion. I believe it's changing, but for a long time, the only way they were disposed of their dead is to lay them out in the open air and let birds pick the flesh off. Because if you bury it in the ground, you're polluting the ground. If you burn it, you're polluting the sky. The only way it can get to the sky, which is where they wanted heaven, they thought heaven would be, is to be carried there by the birds, which is kind of a beautiful expression, but paired with this gruesome detail. And so, again, trying to have the both of words world and have them meet was kind of here with this piece. In my mind, it's very beautiful. But on the other hand, its purpose is very grotesque. But maybe one day, if we have another pandemic, or somebody was asking me in an artist meeting the other day, they're like, dude, what do you think about all the threats? And I was like, I think we live in a time when there's like 5 guns to our head. There's nuclear stuff, there's the health system about to crash, there's the environment about to collapse. So it surprises me with all those things going on that we don't think about these things more, but maybe that is the reason why we don't, because it get a little too real. I think, again, trying to flip the script on luxury and indulgence and crenellation. I think one aspect where people don't think about that, because it gets clouded in religion for reasons that are totally legit, and I'm not a religious person, but I get very interested in religious art because I think it's one of the rare instances where people are sometimes, especially in the older art, driven by the need to do the best because it's something that they believed in. And it's not about money, and it's not about credibility, it's about getting it right out of honor. And when that opportunity is combined with the premise of making a physical realization of something that is not, as far as we know, real, as far as we know, heaven is entirely an imagination within ourselves, and yet we see it across the globe. So here are two very polar opposite civilizations going on here. The one on the right is a Central American 17th century colonial church. So it's taking all that Western, which is also kind of Islamic because it's coming from Spain, that crenellation, and then even pushing it further because it's kind of colonial, and so they really got, something to prove, because they're, like America throwing the tea. I think that's also kind of this like, we can do it too. And then the other image is from the Rose Mosque in Shiraz, Iran, which is pink and beautiful, and it's one of the buildings I'd love to see the most in the world, so I really hope we can work things out with Iran so I can go see these mosques. But what I love about them is they're just, these things that seem so not popular in art today, have been popular, and so I guess I'm always looking back to art history to kind of check myself and be like, maybe I'm not seeing it today, but was it there before? Because if it was there before, it means it can happen, and no one has it happen. It did happen, and it was successful. And mentally, even though we have iPhones, we're no different than the people that made these things. And so also I think there's an effect going on here that goes right back to that apotheosis of like, in both of these works, what is real and what is fake, and where the surface of this dome or this thing begins and where it ends becomes very hard to tell. And there's something about that drawing the line between life and death and real and things that I just get obsessed with it. It makes me happy. On the other side of that, the money side, the power side, we have these two images together. So the image over here is of Louis II, the Mad King of Bavaria. He's the one that made the fairy tale castle that the thing in Disneyland is based on. Ruler of Bavaria at a time where Bavaria was about to not to be, was just about to be assumed in Germany. So he had a title, but not the power, and he had an allowance. And he was also, hard to say exactly how these days, but he definitely was mentally ill. So he would make these palaces. He was trying to make his own Versailles. Probably on the other side of that room is a concrete hallway that's completely unfinished. And he's making these things, and they're all about glamour. One time he had Meissen make him the most biggest, grandest chandelier you've ever seen, and he said, break the mold so there could never be another. That kind of person. But the thing about it is nobody was ever allowed inside here. He did not like people. He did not like people around him. So he was sitting here cooped up like a mad person. And we see the gold and we see the crystal, but it's a little bit too much. It's a little bit too cramped. It doesn't quite work. It's hard to put your finger on why, but at least for me, I know it's true. And once I see it, I can't unsee it. And when I see that image, I think about this image, which is of the former president and current several indictee, Donald J. Trump. What I would consider his kind of famous as a person growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, people were really putting this image close to Donald Trump's apartment. And it's using the exact same language that we see over here, but I think the same things apply. It doesn't quite work. It feels a little bit too slick and corporate and out of a mold. I don't know, these guys. They make it fall apart. This molding right here makes it fall apart for me. Little tiny things that aren't important unless you're Jessica Fletcher and you're trying to solve a murder, and then or elect a president, and then suddenly these things are super important and very telling. So my kind of homage to those things, and one of the things that's hard about decoration that makes it such a challenge is, what is it? Where does decoration begin? What's the difference between decoration and ornamentation? I've been looking for a year, can't get a good answer. Nobody seems to know. Some people I've read say that decoration is so complicated because it's so big and wielding, it goes all the way from architecture to down to jewelry, from the building to the microscopic. And he said that the English language, it's much easier to discuss these things in Germany and France, and that they just have a better lexicon for it than we do in America. Ornamentation and decoration being an example. I'll tell you this, if somebody knows the difference, send me a DM, I would love it. So this is a big piece. I made it a couple years ago. It's all about facade. It's all about mixing real and fake and just putting it all together like a drag queen to make an edifice that puts across a message and to kind of prove that it doesn't necessarily have to be about money. And I'm always trying to be the magician and the revealer of the secrets. And we can't really see it because I have a video that shows it, but we couldn't get it to play. But basically how it works is if you were to walk around this side, which you could, you would see that it was just bare wood. It's like Louis II's Bavarian castle. This is finished and the other side is not. And you could walk around and put your face right here like a carnival prop. And so you had the choice to be the person or not. And did you want to go back there? And once you knew the secret, would you choose to do it or not? And also hopefully, which I hope would be an avenue to kind of both realization at things that seem solid and seem certain or not. And because they're not solid and because they're not certain, you can manipulate them if you know how. That's the video that can't play. This is in here just to kind of show another part of the process is that things get remade a lot. So these are the 3 previous incarnations of that piece over the last 10 years. So this one is from grad school. This one is from about 5 years after that. That one's from about 3 or 4 years after that. And I never really felt like I got it quite right until this last piece. And here we are a couple years later, and I'm like, oh, I could have done XYZ better. Here's my body coming through. Just a kind of examination. This was kind of, for me, referencing back Gothic art and those kind of reliquaries of Gothic art where they're studded with these kind of multitude of different gems. And the reason they're so kind of disparate is because different rich people and pilgrims are bringing these jewels as kind of a way of buying certain, you know, I want to get in good with Saint Bartholomew, so here's an emerald to put in his thing that holds his foot, you know. But I just really, but I also love the things because they came together over time, and somebody had to lovingly figure out how it's all put together. And in the times of the Middle Ages, that's what they're spending their time on and their money on. And I guess maybe it's a little bit better than like a war siege machine, you know. So at the time that these pieces started, I was really trying to come to terms with like, I mean, I knew I was gay, but I couldn't figure out where I belonged in the gay world. I couldn't seem to be desired anywhere because I was fat and I was kind of femme, and that was 2 strikes against you in the gay world. And I couldn't find it in Texas where I grew up. And then I went to Seattle where there was a big bear culture, and it kind of started coming around. And one of the ways that I kind of found my way through it is I had 2 problems. I had a real problem and I had a need. I wanted to make work about my body, but I didn't know how to kind of do it. And at the same time, I didn't have enough money or the knowledge yet to figure out how to ship the ceramic pieces. So I had to make something that could be shipping because it was just happening that people kind of outside of my immediate area wanted to show the things. So I thought, oh, if I make something out of fabric, I can roll it up. And if I do this beading thing, it would be just like those Gothic things, but it would also force me to come to terms with my body bead by bead, inch by inch, and kind of honor it and come to love it by bejeweling it. And I think it kind of worked. And I haven't made one in a couple of years because I haven't had the time, but they've kind of become this way of me checking in with my body and kind of recording it as I go through life and saying like, oh yeah, you're not so bad. I don't even know where we are with time. I'm sorry for going long. I try very hard to stay in here. But I'm going to kind of speed through a little bit. This is a fear of death mask. It kind of started as a death mask, and then I thought, well, a death mask is supposed to make people look like they're supposed to look past when they've died. This is not what this is doing. It's covered with these shells that I would found in a farm in Texas, and they're 200 million years old. And I thought, oh, if you made a mask out of it, and you put it on your face, you thought about how many things had died in the 200 million years since you've put it on, it might help me take some anxiety away. And it's kind of like a weighted blanket, but more Rococo. Another thing that's really been dealing more kind of directly with the queer aspect of my life is this kind of what I call the projection protection series. And again, it's kind of going back to the idea when you were looking at what decoration might be in nature, it's almost always certainly involved in either camouflage to hide you from predators or advertisement to either help you find a mate for mating or to advertise that you're a poison toad and you will be certain death, right? And so I was thinking a lot about how like we kind of do those things in the drag community and the queer community about how we're both always hiding and kind of projecting. And so this piece here with the mask is called the Weird Queer Mask. And it was kind of thought about if you're in a moment where you're really weak and beaten down, you could put the mask on, which cut off your vision. So you could be kind of cut off from the world and maybe protected, while at the same time projecting this image. And you'll see here these orchids, which will come back. So the orchids over time have kind of become this really, I think, effective metaphor for what queerness is kind of meaning to me. In that orchids, for the most people, what I think their perspective is that they seem exotic. They have kind of a sexual connotation to them because of the shape of the flowers, because of this weird middle kind of stamina, which is really unique to their whole brand. And they seem exotic. They seem not from wherever you're from. They're from a million miles away, and they have to be in a greenhouse or they die. And the more I get into orchids, the more I learn about them. The more I learn about that's completely untrue. There's more orchid species than there are all the animals combined. They're the biggest plant grouping out of any of the plants. They grow on every continent except Antarctica. Some of them can grow without dirt. Some of them can grow without leaves. I think there's even a couple that don't have chloroform, and they just collaborate with fungi to make it work. In Arkansas alone, I think there's 10 native orchids. So the appearance of them and the impression of them is actually completely different than the reality of them. And I thought in the way that those two things worked was a really good metaphor for what it was to be queer. Whereas maybe the rose is a metaphor for straight culture, to me, the orchid is the queer culture. And so this is kind of getting to jewelry. Jewelry is one of the newest things. I always enjoyed doing it. It's so precise. It's such like a form of engineering. It makes this really great kind of foil to the ceramics that everything helps that from getting old and stale and something that I don't want to do anymore. But also it felt like I was just leaving money on the table because what's more of a decoration than jewelry? And jewelry goes back 10,000 years. They have found, before even there were civilizations, they have found Stone Age people trading forth amber beads. And so I think the minute that we got into groups and somebody became the leader, we needed a piece of jewelry to show that. And so this thing that's not important, I mean, fashion is not important, and then jewelry is not even more important than that because it's such a decoration, and yet I can't imagine another form that has a richer or deeper or longer history than jewelry. So I just kind of felt like if I'm taking this on, I really want to do this idea of decoration, then I have to be honoring the jewelry. And it's not been such a financial success, and I'm not making it super easy to buy them, to be honest, but really what they're there for right now is to keep the fire going, because the ceramics just trust the process and keep it going, and it's fun and it's interesting, but it's not like a new discovery every day. But every one of these necklaces I make, and there's only 2 or 3 a year because they take so much time and energy to collect the pieces and to figure out how they're going to work. And then here we are, the final kind of point, which is more the performance side of things. This is kind of the dark horse of the practice, but again, it's like the jewelry in that somehow it's lighting the fire that keeps the water boiling. And so this piece here with me wearing these flowers happened first. And I was doing a residency in California, and I made this weird suit that had all these holes out of ceramics to be like a wearable vase. And then I went and collected flowers. This has actually happened in California. It happened in Lobo? What's the town in between here and? Lodi. There you go. The college, I can't remember the name right now because I'm in front of a bunch of people, but anyway, so I picked all these flowers off the canvas and we took this picture, and I think it's one of my favorite pieces I ever made, and it's called I Want to Be Flowers, and again, it was just kind of this idea of like an apotheosis, but turning into flowers, and also having flowers be an armor, which of course they can't in any structural way be an armor, but maybe in a kind of an emotional and symbolic way they could. So then I made that piece, and then I started thinking about how much that piece looked like the image next to it, which is of a ghillie suit, which is, I guess this is what super straight masculine warmonger people do. They imagine that they're these snipers, and then you dress up in the moss, and then you go, and nobody can see you, and then you're shot, that whole kind of thing. I thought, oh my God, but look, they're the same. And so I got really kind of fascinated by that. And then around the same time, I found an old World War II helmet in an antique store or thrift store or whatever. And I thought, ooh, I want to queer this. And so I made this piece, which is kind of a combination of the jewelry. The orchids are still there. And again, it was thinking about camouflage, and it was kind of thinking about like, what do I want to camouflage? I want to camouflage to that church. I want to camouflage into paradise. And so I think part of that, and what I really becoming a realization, I think is so much about the practice, is how important this artificiality has been to me in the practice, and how important it's actually been to queer history, and to a lot of people who are disadvantaged, because if reality doesn't give you the future that you want, sometimes the only way to get there is to imagine it. And if you don't have it in real life, at least you can begin to imagine a way to get there. How do you know where to go if you can't see the destination? So I think this idea of imagining and camouflaging and really kind of pushing this idea as a paradise and blending into it has always been part of what it is to be queer. Here's an image of it without me wearing it. That's kind of the instrumental stuff, and kind of moving very quickly into more performance stuff. In the last maybe 10 years, I've been kind of realizing, like, if I didn't fire my ceramics, I could literally make them the size of a room, because I could just, instead of putting just little flowers and little pieces of fabric, I could dip blankets. So I started making these pieces, which again are like the performances. They only happen every 3 or 4 years because it takes that long to get all the pieces to come together. I have to have the clay, I have to have the space, I have to have the helpers. This is what it kind of looks like without an acting. And here's what it looks, and then so that idea was kind of happening with this idea, which is I love the Rococo, I love the Baroque, and I love, this is by Hyacinth Rigaud, who painted that very famous Louis XIV portrait. This is a lesser noble. But what I kind of know about historical painting is that in reality, the only thing that this person in the portrait would have been there for is the painting of his hands, maybe, and mostly for the portrait. And then the wig, the clothes, everything else was either on a dummy or just pure imagination. And I thought, oh my God, that's just like digital culture. Like, we're closer to this person maybe than we've ever been before. And then also I was thinking how much the aesthetic of this matches the aesthetic of this queen from Paris is Burning, who again, maybe not in the digital culture, but is pulling these looks out of thin air to make these kind of fabulous things. And if we were to get that into the daylight, would it hold together? I don't know. But in the light of the club and the moment, he is this. And so I'm always hoping to do these things, but here, we couldn't get this video to play, but I have pulled it up here. Oh, play for me, please. No.
Here.
So again, it's 8 minutes long, so I won't play it all, but trying to be the musician and try to be the magician and the secrets. I had to start the video with me out of the fantasy, getting ready.
You can start.
And then you see me moving into the fantasy, getting in it. And we don't have sound, but what's playing right now is Sylvester's You Make Me Feel Mighty Real, very famous trans icon. I mean, so early, so early.
You ready?
And just thinking about that idea about mighty real and how important imagination and fantasy was to him in the 70s and that moment, and how it was kind of coming back to me. And one of the problems with the performances, challenges, is I'm always not sure what to do, because I'm always drawing it from paintings, and there's not a lot of action of paintings. And so the person I was working with during this residency said, sometimes it's just enough just to exist. So it was just me kind of existing and having the world built around me. And I'm hoping to do this again in the spring, just more. But it's looking a little shaky right now, so I'm sure. Okay, that was the end. 6:30, I didn't do too bad. 6:20. There's always a stunned silence. I haven't decided if it's good or bad yet. But it's pretty.
I don't even need the mic. How do you make your structures, your sculptures? You really use the little tchotchkes, right?
Are we talking about ceramics?
Yeah, ceramics.
Yeah, so,
You glue them on and then,
well, what happens is all the ceramics are cast, and so they're hollow inside. It's just the nature of their making. And I break off the bottom. This is part of the reason why I like to use the real figurines, is because I'm breaking them, and they don't always break the way I want. I'm getting better and better at breaking them, but I'll be like, oh, I've got a figurine, and it's going to go right here, and it's going to be perfect, and then it'll not break in the right place, and so I have to come up with a plan B. So yes, I do really use them. How they work is they're hollow, and I put in glaze on the inside, and I shove clay into that, fresh clay, and then I attach that clay to the sculpture. and it all dries together and then
Are you
fires
using
together.
porcelain or?
It has to be porcelain. And almost just the other day, I was like sitting in my studio trying to figure out if something was porcelain or not. But 99% of the time, I can just touch it and know by its weight. And it's colder than lesser fired things.
I love those.
But I just think they have more information than I could ever build into it. And that they bring in that magic of Antiques Roadshow. I don't know the stories, but I know their stories.
Yeah. There's another thing, I don't know if you know piqué acier, do you know that?
I don't believe so.
Passionately broken china, where when a piece breaks, you can save it. And then there's a knife, or not a knife, a little hammer that you can use.
Yeah.
And you can never break it perfectly, like you said, but you can get some pieces and then you glue it on some kind of container that's glazed.
Yeah.
And then you grout around it and you use sanded grout and you can use different colors. And you can do it.
Those are knocking around the back. One day they'll figure their way out. Yeah. I think, yeah, I love the one that's too where they do the same thing but with just little weird found objects and they'll just coat a jar or something and
Yeah.
I love that.
So with your jewelry, are you casting parts of the jewelry, or are they found objects also, or are they?
So yeah, the jewelry is, in my mind, there's two branches to it. There's the orchid jewelry, which is kind of doing the queer symbology, metaphor, blah blah blah. And then the other side, like the things that I'm wearing now, are much more of kind of a wonder cabinet type feeling. And so it's me finding objects and just always constantly collecting objects. That should really be in the thing because that's like the third heat of the practice is this collecting. It's always part of it. And so the jewelry is, the first part is collecting the objects and then kind of waiting for them to start coalescing and making sense together. And then once I have kind of a theme emerging, like, I don't really have a good one here, but sometimes it's I want to make a rainbow color. I have a bunch of animal pieces that all have animals, and so it's an animal kingdom. I just made one that's called the Silk Road because all the parts magically kind of came from all the countries along the Silk Road. And so where they kind of function, and so the jewelry is then is figuring out metal holders to kind of engineer that all together in a way that you can wear it, really wear it, and not think it's going to break on you, which is so much harder to do than just to make a vase that sits on a, you know, like if I make a sculpture, all it has to do to be successful in life is sit on a mantle, you know, and that's a lot easier challenge than making the jewelry. So it's collecting and then kind of engineering their place, and then fighting to make them actually function. And I guess it's just kind of a thing to me also about like what decoration is so great about doing is just like collecting all these things together, like the story of, no, never mind, but there's a lot of stories in our history where like this thing started here, but then they liked it over here, or Genghis Khan conquered this country and suddenly they had the, you know, and just how like through objects we can kind of tell a story and understand a story. And
Okay, well, I think that we should wrap it up right there.
yep. Thank you guys. Thanks for coming.